and welcome to this members, officers and viewers on the YouTube channel to this licensing committee meeting. Thank you very much. And we will start with the business. Apologies from absence. And we have one apology from Lynn Walters and no substitutes. I think we're all here now, aren't we? We will move on to the next one. Declarations of interest. Has anybody got any peculiarity or non-peculiarity interest in any of the items tonight? No? No. Thank you very much. We will move on to the next item. Minutes of the previous meeting, which should have all been circulated to it and hope you've all read. Thank you. Can I have a proposer? Seconder? Councillor Ramage proposing. And Councillor Taylor second. And I will sign the minutes. Just up here, isn't it?
I have to agree, Chairman.
Oh, I'm to agree, please, sorry. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes, keep them on my toes. Next item is public question time. We have nobody from the public here, so we will move on to the next item. Thank you. And that's Braintree Council's revised Gambling Act 2005, and it's a licensing policy statement. And I will hand over to Dan Malini to run us through it.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. You will notice that my name is not John Meddings. I'm Dan Malini. I'm afraid John apologises, but he can't be with you this evening. So I'll be running through the reports with you. So the first item is the Braintree District Council's revised Gambling Act 2005 licensing policy statement. And for those committee members that were at the committee, probably 2 committees ago, where we brought this piece of work to the committee, you'll remember that this was a light touch review of the Gambling Act policy. I am in a position, before I just go through the report, before I summarise the report, apologies, I'm in a position to advise you that we have received further updates from the Gambling Commission actually this week, and you will be aware that there was a clash between when the government had introduced a gambling white paper, the Gambling Commission doing the work to respond to that white paper, and when district authorities have to review their statement of gambling policies, which have to be reviewed by a set date on a 3-year cycle, which meant, unfortunately, that each district borough up and down the country would have to review their policy before any revised guidance is issued by the Gambling Commission, which is a very unfortunate position to be in, which in effect means that we will have done this work for little reward apart from being compliant with the requirements of the Act that says you must review your policy every 3 years. And the beauty of that, though, if we were ever to have a challenge to an application, that we can say that we have a policy in force. Unfortunately, you can't just extend the gambling policy for another 6 months or a year, so you don't have the situation, but that is the situation we're in. Anyway, the Gambling Commission have said that they are looking at all the 16,000 responses that were received to the the government's white paper. They wanted to make it clear that we do now have a new government in place, and they are yet waiting for the implications of any major policy shifts. The Gambling Commission said they are still working towards going through the responses. They've not been advised to stop and start again. However, we were initially advised that we would get updates to guidance, national guidance, in September 2024. That's not likely to be in place until summer, autumn, at least next year. So when we said that in this report that we would look to review the policy again, ideally next year, that this report is now out of date, and actually that may be the year after. until we get substantive changes through the white paper. So, but unfortunately, they couldn't tell us anything in particular that has changed of significance yet. But I feel that there will be. You probably would have seen the national press on changes to gambling policy in the UK. So I'll just quickly go through this. As I say, some people have called this in the county a date change policy or a date change report, where we are literally changing the date of one policy and putting another date on just to be compliant. We've done a little bit more than that. I think we had some requests for changes at the previous at the committee, but it is a very light touch. So as you're aware, the licensing authority under the Gambling Act 2005 has a legal obligation to have a gambling licensing policy statement which must be reviewed and published every 3 years. The policy sets out the principles the council as the licensing authority will generally apply to promote the licensing objectives. We have licensing objectives in the Gambling Act as well as the Licensing Act. You'll be aware that we have limited gambling premises in the district. We don't have any major infrastructure, as in some parts of the county and obviously in the country, but we do have a number of betting shops, and we do have gambling by way of permits that are in place in licensed premises and in clubs. And I would be churlish to say that gambling doesn't go on in the district, so it certainly does. This policy does not cover remote gambling, and we need to be very clear on that. And you're certainly entitled to ask any questions, but it's not meant to fill or regulate the online world. So we're talking about fixed gambling in fixed premises, so pubs, clubs, betting shops, etc. The Gambling Commission will regulate that area, and I think that's where much of the white paper's work will be, in the remote arena as such. So I really do not intend to go through this report in great detail, apart from that we did undertake a consultation. It was a 6-week consultation. There's a chance that if we do a more substantive change that the consultation may last longer, but 6 weeks is a purely satisfactory time period. And we received one response to the consultation, and that was from Essex Police, which highlighted a redundant policy which they no longer work to with regarding to their enforcement policy or enforcement policy arrangements. In the meantime, the District Council has published its own enforcement policy, which does apply. So apart from that, there were no other consultations from any groups or companies that are involved in gambling. So the options available to you are that the draft statement of gambling licensing policy be approved for submission to full council. You'll be aware that this is a requirement that we will need to take this policy to full council as well. Option 2 is not to approve the draft licensing policy, but we are requesting that you do, and that's the preferred option, as the council has a legal obligation to have a policy which is reviewed in accordance with a statutory time period of every 3 years. Option 2, I'm afraid, would result in the council in not meeting its legal obligations and will expose the council to could expose the council to legal challenge. So can I pass this back to the chairman?
Yes. Thank you. Has anybody got any questions on this particular document? Councillor Mason.
Thanks. I have a couple of questions, please. I'm new to this committee, so they might seem stupid, but I want you to ask them just for my own interest. In terms of the consultation documents, you had very, very low response, which I read was quite normal. But what could be done to try and raise that? I mean, how is the consultation done? I know it's done through various groups, but where is it advertised? Is it all online? Is there stuff in the newspapers? How does that come about?
I mean, there's a public consultation which is we do advertise our consult. Apologies. Thank you for that. The consultation is generally targeted because it is quite a niche policy. I'd like to say otherwise, but I'm afraid sometimes I work in quite a dry field, and a lot of our consultations are not particularly very well responded to because it is quite a niche and potentially a dry subject. But we do try and consult with as many groups as we can. There's a list of consultees which we can provide, and it is quite thorough. I would say that we're not constantly updating social media to say please respond to our gambling policy, which we have done with other policies actually, but we haven't done with gambling. So we could try and raise more interest. But I believe this is the sixth version of the policy since 2005 when the legislation came in, and it's not uncommon. We have in the past had some national responses, which they will respond the same to, to each council when they're doing it. But I was at a forum in Essex, and it's quite common that it's a similar kind of thing. So I think we're broaching the right level of advertising the consultation process. I hope that's answered your question.
And you had another question?
Yes, I do have one more. In point 1513, I think is what it is, it talks about the licensed premises having to do a risk assessment, and that has to be available on their sites for authorised people to come and inspect. But I just wondered, what about the general public? Is there not an expectation that they have that risk assessment on site for the general public to look at if they want to?
So this is, very true, but it's quite Thank you. Next time, I promise you. In fact, I can't promise you, can I?
Yes. I'm picking up that point you was looking at. So.
You can tell I don't do this a lot. The risk assessment it's a similar kind of document as you would find in a health and safety risk assessment, but it's gambling related. And it looks in quite detail. So there's no requirement that it needs to be available to the public. I do agree with you though. I don't think it would harm if customers would be able to see that. But it's meant that it's really a document to say that these companies have had regard to a particular area and a particular risk. You will find them when we receive an application. And we had an application in the last 2 years where they provided quite a detailed risk assessment. But yeah, you're right. There's no legal requirement that it's available for public. That I'm aware of. But you do raise a good point.
Thank you. Any more? Councillor Ramage.
Thank you, Chair. Dan, just trying to get my head around the time frame for these laws to be put in place. I mean, we're on the 3-year bit now, aren't we? And you're saying the actual new stuff that we're looking at won't come into effect until middle of next year, something like that?
Yeah, middle to late.
So, if something happens that relates to that new legislation, say in the next 6 months, what will apply? Will it be the old stuff or the new stuff? Can you see where I'm coming from?
Yeah, I can. Thank you, Councillor Ramage. If the government makes significant changes where new legislation is required, then I think that would be that we would all have to prepare for that. But there's no suggestion that will take place. It's a case of the suggestion is there'll be changes to guidance, and once those changes are made through guidance, then we will be advised, and then it will be for the authority to decide whether it feels that those changes are so significant that it's going to affect their gambling policy, and when do we do that? We've said in this report, rightly or wrongly, that we were told by the Gambling Commission these changes and this guidance would be out in September. At the national update this Tuesday, we were told now it could be next September. And we made a commitment in this report that we feel that we were going to redo the policy again next year. There really is no point doing the same thing that we have done just now, and we should wait for any significant changes that are made by the Gambling Commission. They were kind of saying that they feel that, you know, there could be new suggestions or changes by the new government, but they're not telling us what they are at the moment. So I think it would be for us, in consultation with the chairman, to decide how quickly we should react. And you have this issue where, and unfortunately with the Gambling Act, that let's say if we don't revise the policy again in 2025, and then we get halfway through 2026 or even towards the end of 2026, and the changes come in then, we would have to make the decision of whether we go through a 3 to 4 or 5 month process, then to have to start again, because we have to do this again by, so it runs out in 28. We'd have to do it in 28. So, you know, and you can't just go, right, we're gonna do it again, and therefore the clock goes back another 3 years. You have to do it in a distinct 3 periods. So we have to make a decision when the timings of the next survey and consultation. I would suggest that if we've got enough time, we would want to do it as quickly as possible once we've received any substantive changes. But it will depend on what those changes are. We're talking about, I think the focus on the white paper is going to be remote gambling now.
I mean, when it's approved, does it start 3 years from that date? When it's approved, it will start in effect a rolling 3 years from the date the existing policy ends, and that's the key thing. But once we've finished this process, hopefully that we do, it will now go to full council before the end of January, and that's the timescale that we have to work. That's the timescale that we have to work to, and then it gives us another 3 years to do, you know, to change it as necessary. Meanwhile, we're still with the old stuff
We're with the old policy now
until
the old policy now until the end of January, and we get the new policy from January, bearing in mind that the new changes could but the new guidance could come in September. But it depends what the guidance says. Well, I'm not particularly concerned that the guidance is going to make huge changes to what we do and at the level that we do it. Yeah. As I say, remote gambling is the area that I feel that the white paper will concentrate on. There will be changes. I mean, for instance, they've already made a change to guidance, which is something that the companies have to do at a national level, which it doesn't really matter that it's not in our policy, that it requires all gambling companies to undertake internal test purchasing. You know, so in shops, so in theory, they will send employed test purchases to go in to make sure that under 18s aren't going into betting shops and that kind of thing. So that's already changed in the last few weeks. You know, unfortunately not in time for this policy change, but that's something that the companies have to do as a requirement of law. So it's not something that it makes a difference if we've not got it in our policy.
Right. I mean, if it's say it's a gambling machine in a club or something like that, they would have to put a notice up to say not to be used by under 18s or something like that, would they?
They do anyway.
Yeah.
They do anyway.
But, you know, obviously...
It depends what levels of gambling.
Because they know if they haven't done that, their licence could be taken away.
Absolutely. And that's potentially a role of the local authority who we issue those permits in licensed premises. And that's the arena where we do more, is in licensed premises, as opposed to... they have a licence in gambling, in bookmakers, but they also will have a licence from the Gambling Commission. But permits are issued by the local authority, and that's where we get involved in clubs and pubs.
Thank you.
Councillor Swear. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think the officer's given a very good summary of this detailed report before us, and as he mentioned, it has gone out to all of those interested parties, and I'd like to reassure everybody on the committee that the Braintree District Council is extremely good at comms and our legal obligations, especially with the licensing committee. It's imperative that it is, and we are very good at doing that. And taking into account that only Essex Police has contacted us to remove a redundant policy, and all else that Daniel said with regards to the tweaks, that there's very little movement until such time as the new regulations will come along with the changes in law. I would move recommendations of this report as set out in 2.1 and 2.2.
Thank you. So we're happy to go ahead. Councillor Parham?
Need a seconder, Councillor Brown.
Yes. Yeah, we're getting there. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Taylor. Thank you. All those in favour? It's unanimous. Thank you. We now proceed to the next item on the agenda, and that's amendments to conditions of Hackney Carriage Proprietors Licences, contactless and card payments. And again, the report is by Dan Malini. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is a report regarding amendment to conditions for Hackney Carriage Proprietors. So we're talking about taxis, if anybody wants to ask me questions regarding, differences between taxis and private hire, that's absolutely fine. But these are the vehicles that could be hired in the street and at ranks, principally. So the council again is the authority for Hackney Carriage Proprietors licences, and in accordance with section 47 of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1976, the council has discretional powers to attach such conditions as it considers reasonably necessary to Hackney Carriage Proprietors licences. The purpose of this report is to present the results from the consultation on amending the conditions to include a mandatory condition to have a functioning cashless payment facility available for fare-paying passengers. I'll mention the recommendations at the end. But we're aware as a local authority, times are changing in terms of cash payments generally, and we've been made very aware over quite a few years that there's an increasing number of taxi drivers and proprietors that have already adopted contactless or card payments to their vehicles, and I think that's as a result of demand from their customers asking them for them to do so, and they've certainly decided that it's in their financial interest to provide those that options. However, unfortunately, the council is receiving complaints from members of the public and from drivers, generally from drivers who do provide contactless payments, as a result of some of their colleagues not wishing to do so or not providing payments. So we have a situation where some drivers will, some drivers won't, and it can be quite difficult for customers to navigate this, especially when they could go to a taxi rank and find that the first driver won't, second driver will, or vice versa, 1 week and then it changes the next week, and it can be quite a difficult situation for customers to understand why some will and some won't. We all know that credit cards and debit cards are now a more popular choice of payment, and in addition, the fast and easy contactless payment feature on a debit card is becoming increasingly popular. There's a feeling from officers, but actually a number of those in the trade have got the right idea, that card payments would lead to an easier and quicker method for customers to pay taxi fares. We've all had the anecdotal stories where taxi drivers have been asked to stop at cash machines to pick up cash, or unfortunately, and I have heard it in my time, where taxi drivers have asked passengers to leave their vehicle because they don't have then, once the hiring has occurred, then have been advised that they don't have cash. And I had heard one horror story that occurred on, in the dark, a lone female between Braintree and Whittam, which is highly satisfactory. This was some time ago. I'm not trying to say it was fairly recently, but it was some time ago. But actually, a driver had asked somebody to leave their vehicle because they couldn't pay the fare. Now we understand that drivers sometimes get that that customers can't pay his fares. But if a customer's saying that they've got a card, then there is a question potentially to be asked. We all know that in most situations you can pay by contactless card on the bus and rail networks, and if customers are trying to finish off their last part of the journey and they can't do that with a taxi, then it's quite possible that customers will move away from taxis and get into vehicles which, where they can, like for instance, they can advance booking, tap and go with private hire vehicles. So there's a feeling amongst the trade that they need to keep up with the times. Card payments facilities can be incorporated with taxi apps, which facilitate the use of card payment through a small phone application, where customers are able to pay the fares, which can be used by customers either by pre-hiring or hailing off the street. And we're obviously saying that the key benefit of mandating the acceptance of card payments would be to provide customers with a wide range of payment options. However, Council will only be able to mandate that contactless card payments are accepted, but not how. This will be up to licensed drivers or vehicle proprietors to determine, and I think it's important that we're not too prescriptive of how we want that requirement to be made. But there is still choice available to owners and drivers. We're feeling that some devices can be purchased for as little as £19, so the outlay of providing a contactless card machine is not significant. There'll obviously be the cost of processing the payment, but we advise now that those costs can be quite minimal as well. But the key thing is that customers will not be expected to pay the additional charge at source. We feel that it would improve public safety, especially if, as what I've said previously, especially if there's potential that somebody who doesn't have cash, who can't get cash, will make a poor choice in getting home when that other choice could have been by using a card. We all know that it's quite possible that we could lose cash, and if we could even lose our cards, of course, that can happen as well. But some people have their cards on, a lot of people have, sorry, I don't, but a lot of people have their cards on their telephones these days. And we know that it's less likely to lose their telephone, and in an emergency, it's potentially a much better option. The key thing is here, and which it does say in the report, we're not asking proprietors and drivers to switch. This is as well as, so customers will be able to pay in cash and cards. As part of the process, we would want our vehicles to have signage in to say that cashless payments can be made, and that would need to be in certain parts of the vehicle to make sure that all passengers can see that. And it's important to note that our colleagues in our two neighbouring authorities, our two largest neighbouring authorities, apologies, because we've got quite a few neighbouring authorities, Colchester and Chelmsford have made card payments mandatory for taxis. So we are a little bit behind on this. We sent out a consultation to those people that were affected. The consultation wasn't a public consultation, but it was a trade consultation. And we sent that to 265 consultees, and of those 265 consultees, a large number of those will be taxi drivers, but whenever we issue licences, it wasn't purely to taxi drivers, and there would be potential for some responses to come from private hire drivers. But we sent it to all those licence holders that have the potential for driving a Hackney carriage, as well as to proprietors of the vehicles who may not hold a driver's licence. We received 33 responses, which potentially is reasonable for a licensing response. Unfortunately, I would have liked it to be a higher response rate, but again, unfortunately, that's not uncommon. But we did receive 33 responses. I'll just quickly go through some of the responses, and you can see that 25 of the respondees did drive Hackney carriages. 24 said they do currently provide contactless payments, and then 26 felt that taxis should be fitted with a contactless payment device as standard, whereas 7 felt that they did not feel that it was appropriate. 28 of the respondees said they agreed that any device should have the ability to provide the customer with a printed or digital receipt, whereas 5 said that they didn't. And then this was a little bit more a closer response, that 21 felt that the proprietor should be paying for the installation of the device, whereas 12 respondents said that they felt that should be the driver or somebody else. It can't be anybody else, it's the driver. So, but that's not surprising because we will probably be aware that some of the vehicles are in effect rented to drivers, and you can see why the proprietor wouldn't want to take on that responsibility as well. However, we've said that that we feel that it would be very difficult, or in fact impossible, to place conditions on drivers for Hackney carriages. It's there's legal argument to say that you can't add conditions to Hackney carriage drivers, which we don't currently. So that's why we would want to put conditions on the proprietors, and therefore, if we're going to introduce contactless payments and make it a condition, it would have to go on the proprietor's licence. And they do own the vehicles, and they do get the benefit of running those vehicles. So we feel that is the right option. There is some opposition to contactless payments, but you can see from the responses, the small responses received, that there is also quite a large response. I said in previously that we didn't undertake a public survey in this situation. However, we have undertaken some quite significant public surveys in the past where this has been a question. The last survey, which you'll be aware of, was in the summer of 2023, and that was regarding the unmet demand survey. And we asked the public to provide a specific response to that. So, with respect to contactless payments in paragraph 5.2, the public survey asked respondents, what improvements, if any, would you like to see Hackney Carriages service in the district? A number of responses related to cash payments were received and are shown in the tables below in 5.2 and 5.3. There's not a lot of responses, but there are some responses there, and you will see that they're mixed in with other issues that the respondent had also identified. Council took a trade and public survey in the winter of 22-23 regarding issues affecting the Hackney carriage trade. The trade survey was sent to all drivers and all Hackney carriage proprietors and private hire operators, and respondents were asked to provide a response to the following question: should Hackney carriage passengers be able to pay the fare by debit credit card? And at that time, we received 23 responses, and the overwhelming majority, 21 out of 23, agreed that Hackney carriage passengers should be able to pay fare by debit card. And in 5.4, you can see some of the responses are there in more detail. And again, there's more information in 5.5 where respondents were asked if any other comments which are not covered in the questions above, and I've added all the responses which relate to cashless payments. During that survey process, at the same time, the public were asked several questions, which did not include a specific question regarding cashless payments, but one response was received from a member of the public to the following question: do you have any other comments you wish to make? And this member of the public said, I'd like to see them all have card readers so customers can pay either in cash or by card. So these are the responses and the results of consultation that we have carried out. If the proposal is agreed, it's proposed that there will be a 3-month implementation period for the introduction of the new Hackney carriage vehicle condition, and that will give proprietors time to introduce the changes. So, going right back to the beginning of the report, the recommendation is to implement mandatory contactless card payments for all Hackney carriages licensed within the Braintree district, and to amend the conditions for Hackney carriage proprietors licences to include the following conditions, which are: Hackney carriage must have a card payment facility to accept debit, credit and contactless card payments. Any Hackney carriage number 2, any Hackney carriage must display authorised signage regarding the ability to pay with card or contactless. And Mr. Chairman, I'll pass the floor back to you.
Thank you very much, Dan. Is there any questions? Councillor Green.
Yeah, it's not really a question as a comment really. I'm just very pleased that we've allowed the option still to pay with cash as well. I think that's quite important to have that option, because there are still people in the community that don't have access to bank accounts, if you like, and they tend to be vulnerable people, and maybe would use taxis more than other people. So I'm pleased that's kept in.
Thank you. Councillor Van Dolken, you had your hand up?
Thank you, Chairman. If I could just ask Dan two questions. I mean, the first one is, am I right in thinking that, aside from Colchester and Chelmsford, that this is pretty normal around the country now? Yes.
That is correct. I wouldn't say universal, but yes.
So we're really pushing against an open door here. And secondly, a more specific question. What do you think the attitude, there will be some drivers who will resent it for their own reasons. They will prefer cash. That's the way the world goes. If they say, oh, the machine doesn't work here, or it's broken, or, I mean, I've actually had this myself in another country, but I wonder if you just comment on that sort of thing.
I'll certainly try, and I've used taxis, but I used it, and I won't waffle on too much, but I used a taxi a year ago where my family live in Stratford upon Avon, and they live in a very rural part of the district. And I got in a taxi, and it was a mandatory requirement. The driver had a contactless machine. We got to my house in Stratford upon Avon, and the machine wouldn't work. You know, and that will be an issue. But I was able to go knock on the door and get some money and bring it back out, and absolutely it worked fine. But there would be a potential that we will have that. We will have those customers who are saying that the machine's not working. It will be a compliance, and now I think we will have to take a pragmatic view, especially in the beginning, and we'll have to judge each case on its merits. I think we'll build up a picture with drivers who are choosing not to do it on a regular basis, and I think we might have to take different action. But I think it will depend, and as we know that we do have quite a rural, or we do have rural parts of the district, and you know, and if we go into neighbouring districts again, they can be very rural. I mean, I keep thinking about Whitton train station, and my colleagues that are driving to the Woodhams and the Wickham Bishops and out that way and towards Malden, that signal might not be as universal for everyone in the towns, and it will be a problem. But we have that problem now, Councillor Van Dolken, with drivers who have contactless payments, who are refusing to use them for short journeys. But miraculously, machines do work for better well-paid, longer journeys. So we will have to face that. I don't have a 100% answer that I will be right every time, but it's something that we will have to get to grips with. And I think we'll have those problems, especially with the drivers who don't want to implement. Then I think there will be some lag between universal compliance. But I think, unfortunately, I think the taxi trade need to be aware that there are competitors, and customers are using those competitors where they can make payments in advance by an app. And we know who the companies, national companies and international companies, that provide those facilities, and it's very easy to book those sort of vehicles. But also we have local companies that do the same. And it's important that the taxi trade, and this request has come from the taxi trade, that they are really wanting us to implement, because they find it, a lot of the drivers find it frustrating that, you know, that the lead taxi will not necessarily always take a fare. I hope that's been helpful.
Councillor Parker.
Yes, thank you. I was just going to raise the issue actually of if you go to a rural area and there's no phone signal, because you'd need a phone signal presumably for the contactless to work. And I don't know whether it has to be linked to a particular phone provider, because in some areas you get a good signal with EE, in other areas you get a good signal with another provider. So I can see that. I suppose the way the taxi trade will have to address that is that they need to put a sign up saying you need to maybe have the ability to pay by cash if you're going to. So that was the first point. But I have another point as well. But I'll let you. Should I continue? So I just, and the other issue that sort of, sorry, I'm being sort of critical for any, was just thinking about the fees that the taxi drivers have to pay on card payments. I mean, I'm generally completely supportive for this, but I could see possibly a situation where they will say they won't take payments for where the fare is under £5, for example, because that's a common thing you see in small shops. Because of the level of fee, I don't know whether we should be requiring them to. I don't know whether in the condition whether it would appropriate to include for all journeys, so that it would cover the small journey. Just a thought.
Just in terms of the first question, you're absolutely right. I do feel there will be areas where there'll be rural payments, and unfortunately, I will say there may be customers who will take advantage of that. I've got nothing else in my pockets apart from my cards, and I've done this journey 15 times, and the previous 15 times I know that you can't take a car payment. That could happen. I'm not going to start giving you answers about how good the network coverage is in all parts of the district. I'm sure it can vary. It will depend on the provider that the company or driver is using, and that will vary to what they decide they want to use. I have bad signal with my provider in the garden of my house in the middle of a large city, so it can be as much of a problem in wherever. But I would say that, in my opinion, this is my personal opinion, without great deal of fact, that connection is improving all the time, especially with rural broadband providers. And I think if that wouldn't necessarily be a case in itself not to go ahead with that. And I think that they have that. Drivers will unfortunately have that issue now, where customers will just say to them, "I haven't got any money." So I'm not sure if that will change greatly. I think what you may have is a situation where somebody wants to genuinely pay by card and they may not be able to. And in those situations, I'm not sure if it would be appropriate to say that you've also got to carry cash, because that's the whole point of this, that you are providing an alternative. But I think drivers will start giving advice to passengers. That I've been to this address. Bearing in mind that we have a large, as you see from the statistics, we have a large number of drivers already doing this, and we're not getting a huge amount of feedback to say these. I couldn't tell you now whether the areas are bad in the district, and it may just come down to the fact if somebody really wants to pay by card, then they will have to provide. So they will have to choose a method of travel which they have to pay up front, like a private hire potentially. If it really is so significant, where that your village of, I'm not going to say a village because I don't want to tar a particular village in the district, but we all know there's really small villages that are really in the middle of nowhere, as I would say, that might be more difficult. But I think we would have to watch that space. And the second question, even though I said you should ask both at once, I forgot.
It was just the fares for small journeys.
I believe, as an officer, that would be difficult to define. I believe that a journey is a journey. Sometimes we have trouble with, we receive complaints that drivers, regardless of whether they're paying by card or by cash, they will refuse to take small fares, which then creates resentment for the vehicles behind and for the drivers behind, and it actually creates confusion and anger amongst customers. The law requires you to facilitate a journey, regardless of the distance and the cost at the end. And if you think about how vital that could be for certain members of society. We certainly wouldn't be saying that you can only take card after. We certainly wouldn't want to be saying that you should, you should be prepared to pay cash for a small journey, or card for you need to do a certain amount. So I would, as an officer, say we wouldn't be wanting to introduce that, but I understand the point.
I was just wondering whether we should be requiring them to accept payments for all journeys. That was my only.
I think we should. It should be. The fact is, they've got to take all journeys. There's only very few circumstances where a driver can refuse a fare, and they are very limited towards their own self-preservation and safety. In all other circumstances, I would suggest that all fares should be taken.
I just was wondering whether we should add that to condition, but that was my. Okay, fine. All right. Right.
Thank you. Councillor Ramage.
Yeah, firstly, I agree with Councillor Green in that we should have two forms of payment, i.e. cash and contactless. But one thing intrigues me, as we know, taxi drivers expect a tip. I'd be interested to know how they're going to handle it with contactless, especially if they're working for a proprietor. If they're working for themselves, it's not so much of a problem, but, I mean, when they have a tip, it's the sort of thing they put in their own pockets as such, isn't it, And if that's included in the payment, then, the proprietor's probably going to take it rather than the driver.
It's a very good question, and this is the question. And this is the question where I wish I had somebody from a legal department sitting next to me to control what I'm about to say. But I will say it. That a tip is optional. A tip for a card is optional. It's not for a driver to suggest what a tip would be. And I would suggest that if a customer said, your fare, your meter says X, and I want to pay you Y on my card, then that would be. I can't see the obvious constraints with that.
Just thinking aloud, that's all.
Yeah, so I think that tips would be, if a customer wanted to provide a tip, they would be treated in the same way as they would on a card when you're in a restaurant, or where you can choose to say, oh, can you put another 50p or a pound or. But the key thing is the metered fare would not change. They wouldn't be able to say to the customer, the metered fare is £10, and because you're making me take a card, it's now £10.50. And we've had that before, and that wouldn't be lawful.
Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Daniel. I guess, is there anything we can do to support the drivers on the on fares? For example, as you said, you could be going from Braintree Station up to Steeple Bumstead, and you got no signal, and where do you find a cash machine there? So could we provide some guidance or support to the drivers to make it easier to ask for some money up front, bearing in mind I know that you can't predict what the meter might read at the start of a journey, but so that customers don't feel put in a difficult or awkward position. Could we support drivers at the beginning of the journey?
It's difficult, and I wouldn't want to. It's a sort of again a very good question, and again it'd be very difficult to ask for passengers to pay a part up front, because then you have a situation if they pay too much or they're not paid enough. I think it's one of those things that drivers would need to accept that there is the risk that there may be problems with the fare at the end, and I guess we will start learning that after a period of time if this was implemented universally. However, we're not getting that feedback now, and bearing in mind it was quite a significant number of drivers already providing those facilities. I think drivers will tell you that there will be times where they've had issues, and there will be times when the customer said, I'm going to go inside my house and get you some money, and they don't come back out again. But but there will always be times when Daniel Molini did exactly that and did come back out. And unfortunately, that is it's not a perfect system. And bearing in mind this is a system, this is to provide customers where it does work, but it will be advantageous, and it's meant to benefit customers and hopefully drivers as well. But it's not a perfect. There may be we may be coming back to you in the future to give you some review or just to tell you, where we receive complaints from drivers about issues. The drivers will normally tell us fairly quickly, because we do, whilst we have liaison meetings, that we will ask about how, should this be implemented, but, we would want to know if, there are particular issues. But I think it's one of those situations where it's hard to know. There may be issues, but we don't exactly know what they will be.
Councillor Ayton.
Thanks, Chair. Are there card readers that don't require an internet connection, Ian, that we could maybe get drivers to have as a default? The chip and pin require internet? I mean, I don't think some of them do actually need internet, because I have been out before. My phone's not had data and I'll still be able to pay somewhere. So...
I'll be honest with you, I do not know the answer to that. My personal, IT. I thought they would be dependent on getting connection. So in theory, if there's no connection, I'm not sure how the device can talk to a customer's bank. So I would say there needs to be, but I apologies, I don't know the answer.
I mean, the driver could always go to an area where there is Wi-Fi.
That is a possibility, and I think and as I say, I think drivers already are. A lot of drivers are already using this, and I think they will. Yeah. But I'm fairly confident we can't ask drivers. We can't support drivers in getting money up front, I'm afraid.
Councillor Wright.
Is it going to be legal for them to sitting in their driver's seat with the engine running using their phone? I know you can't make the phone call, but some people say you can't use a phone at all if you're driving a car. That driver will be sitting there using that, because I think someone or a taxi driver did complain that he was doing that over the race course, and he got done for holding his phone while taking a payment, not making a phone call. But I imagine he was being cheeky to the police myself. But
I think it comes down to the question of when a device becomes a phone and a card payment device, and when the vehicle is in control. I mean, a driver sitting in a passenger with no engine running and no keys in the vehicle, and I'm not entirely sure if the law applies. So it would come down to whether the police thought that would be an issue. Just so you know, I'm very reluctant to get into that discussion with you, because I don't want to start giving bad advice. However, this is not. This is something that's up and down the country. Yeah, and I've not heard of any side implications as a result of that. But I think it would come down to how that device is being used, and if the vehicle is stationary or not. And there will probably be situations where that device would be, infringing the law potentially. If the providers weren't careful. But you can either use a phone, and drivers will need to make a decision if they want to have a standalone device, which wouldn't be classed as a telephone, and that is an option. But I think what we're not saying in this policy is that it wouldn't be excluded from using something on their phone, because they find it much easier.
Councillor Green.
Sorry, just to answer your question, possibly. A lot of times when I've been in a taxi and there's been a payment device, it's actually been in the back of the taxi, so the driver isn't actually using anything himself. So I don't know if that helps you with your question.
you, and I think if the drivers start realising that's a potential, then they might realise it's a good idea, and that would certainly cover their costs of using the machine. And we can't say that they can't ask for tips, but all we can say is that they've got to, if somebody wants to pay the metered fare, that is a requirement. It's not necessarily an answer, but obviously, as I said before, we do have lots of drivers that are using their phones for contactless payments.
Councillor Van Dolken again.
Well, Chair, I thought we'd given it a good airing, and as this is universal, you know, we don't want to stay in the Stone Age here in Braintree. We may be rural, but we're not Stone Age. And I'd like to move that we accept the recommendations with a small proviso, because it doesn't actually say that here, that cash should also be, I mean, I know that is the intention, but it doesn't actually say that there. But you will obviously ensure that cash is king as well, yes. All right. So that's my
I will say, if you don't mind, this was trade-led, in consultation with the trade. Yes, there will be drivers that will take cash and card, but the idea is to make sure that the facility of card is there for anybody that wants to use it. That's why it's being put onto the proprietors, and some proprietors have 2, 3, 4, 5 cars out there. So it's up to that proprietor to make sure there is one in each car and not one sitting in his office that he hands out. And the idea is some proprietors, you know, taxi 24 hours a day, wants to keep moving. And the idea is that it has to be with the car. Okay?
I was going to second the motion.
Okay.
Second it, so you just need to take a vote now.
And can we all vote, please? And that's unanimous. Thank you. Licensing.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors. This is a regular report we provide generally at each licensing committee. And the purpose of the report is to provide members an update on applications determined by licensing subcommittees and drivers panels. A summary of all applications determined since the last report, which was submitted to committee on the 11th of April, is provided below. The report will also look at other significant issues relevant to licensing. The report is for information only, and members are not required to provide a decision on this report. This report is fairly vague to comply with data protection requirements. If members do require further information on a particular aspect of the report, then please get in contact. In section 3, the chairman of the licensing committee exercised their delegation to immediately suspend a driver's licence on the 25th of June 2024. This was carried out because of a self-declaration made by the licence holder regarding a medical issue, and it was imperative that we suspended the licence immediately. This was not at the fault of the driver. This was unfortunately due to unfortunate medical circumstances. We did this as a result of exercising the authority's primary role of public protection was met. The committee determined an application in early July for the grant of a premises licence with respect to Tidings Hill Premier in Tidings Hill Housestead, following objections received during a consultation period. The committee granted the application.
Yes, Councillor Pell, thank you.
I was quite surprised at this one. I wasn't able to attend this because it affects me where I live. But all my time that I have been unlicensed, and I have never had so many objections coming from the people that lived in the vicinity as I have on this application. And I'm telling you that somebody is going to be really hurt there if people knew the situation of that premises. It's got no parking. It's got the people who are going to run it will obviously just park on the forecourt, which will take just 2 cars. You're going to have lorries pulling up. You're going to have people pulling up. It's the most dangerous part of that Tidings Hill that there is. And I really could not believe that you accepted it. I'm just making a point.
Thank you. Dan Leaney will answer that question.
While I can't respond on behalf of the licensing authority, what I will do is remind committee members that the Licensing Act has a very narrow remit. It does not mimic those of the planning authority, and we all know that the regimes are very separate. And if an applicant can meet a very defined and narrow set of parameters, then the authority in effect is required to issue or grant a licence. There was significant representations to this application. A lot of the representations, I will say, as an officer, were planning related. And what I would like to say to residents and the people living in that area is, then if there are significant issues with public safety, and I would refer to public safety, and I think a lot of the representations made were with respect to highway safety, parking, etc., then there is a universal right to call a review on the premises, which I would urge those residents to think if they want to do that. So, and this is regarding the licence. So there are obviously the planning considerations as well. Thank you. I will carry on if there's any more questions. The committee also determined an application with respect to premises known as Greensted Hall, Church Road, Greensted Green, following again objections received from members of the public. This again was a very narrow application, and it related to a very particular kind of licence. And it would have been very difficult for the authority not to issue a licence. Again, I will say, should there be significant issues with respect to the premises and the licence granted, but residents can call a review of the licence. I will finish, and then I'll open up to the floor up to the committee. You'll see in paragraph 3.4 the drivers' panels met on 8 occasions since the last licensing committee, and most of those were in August, and we considered 32 matters, which is a considerable number, and members probably appreciate that the licensing authority have quite a large number of vehicles and drivers it currently licenses, and that's probably a reflection on the numbers, which are probably nearly 10 times what they were 3 years ago. So we have more than 1,300 drivers, more than 1,000 vehicles that we now license. So the work of drivers' panels has increased significantly as a result. I'm not going to go into each of the matters that were dealt with in paragraph 3.5 through to 3.12, but you will see there a summary of what work was received by the panels and what action was taken, and that varied from issuing licences, refusing licences, or suspending or revoking licences. In section 4 of the report, this provides members of the significant levels of work that the authority is now processing, which you will see. We received just under 2,750 applications in 22-23, and just under 2,800 applications in the last financial year. And if you compare that to 21-22, that's almost double the amount of applications received, and there's still significant interest for driver applications, which is borne through the number of knowledge tests that we have been providing for many, many years, but the number has increased significantly. In terms of Section 5 of the report, you will see here that we're undertaking significant amounts of proactive work with our fantastic partners, Essex Police, which we work with on a fairly regular basis with taxis and private hire vehicles and licensed premises, and we do go all over the district on a regular basis. So we'll be out with the police tomorrow night. I won't say what. I will say we will be out with the police tomorrow night, and we're normally out with the police at least once or twice a month. But we'll also go into neighbouring districts. We'll go to Stansted Airport. Here we went to an event in Chelmsford where we will see high proportions of our vehicles attend. We've been to the racecourse on a number of occasions, and we find it very useful to build up these partnerships with colleagues. We employed one of my colleagues to undertake inspections of private hire vehicles at schools, because we have a large number of vehicles, a huge number of vehicles that will be taking children to school on a daily basis. So we now undertake many, many visits to schools throughout the county and beyond, where we will ensure that our private hire drivers are upholding standards and the vehicles are in fit condition to be driven. And we found that very useful. We've created partnerships with colleagues from other parts of the county, where we meet and we go and do those inspections together. So we're doing a lot of work, especially in the taxi and private hire related fields. Number 6 talks about options for making it easier for hospitality businesses to sell alcohol to drink in licensed pavement areas. You'll be aware that the pavement licence regime is now being made a permanent process. However, there's still this grey area with regard to alcohol sales or consumption of alcohol in these areas, and they are making recommendations regarding these potential changes, which is to make a permanent the temporary easement that's currently in place for all licensed premises with on sales to have off sales. So that is due to end in March 2025, and they're looking to make that permanent. They're looking to amend the license, or option 2 is to amend the Licensing Act to extend the definition of on sales, and option 3 is to amend the Licensing Act to permit on sales only premises licence holders the right to make off sales to any area for which there is a pavement licence. So in effect what they're saying is if a premises has a pavement licence, then you would be able to have on sales in that licence. To make it relevant to this district, there are 91 premises as of April 1st 2024 that currently hold an on sales licence in the district that are benefiting from the temporary off sales exemption. So the exemption does not apply to premises that hold a club premises certificate. So those premises could be affected if no change is made after all, and the temporary exemption lapses next year. You'll be aware that the council made a fare increase on the 1st of July 2024. Cabinet was asked to consider requests made by the trade, and the details of that are in 7 to 7.3. I've talked about pavement licensing briefly above, but the government have made a permanent regime. The council will now be looking to update its policy regarding pavement licences, and I suspect that you will receive a report from me or one of my colleagues in the very near future regarding changes to pavement licences. But they have made some changes to the process. They've made some changes to the fees. The fees were capped during the time of COVID to a very small figure. The authority was compensated centrally by government to ensure that it could meet the costs of facilitating those licences, but now it's likely that the central government funding will be withdrawn and the local authority will be charging the true cost within reason for administering those licences. And they said that for a new licence, the maximum will be 500 and for a renewal licence it will be 350. The licence period will go from 1 year to 2 years. The 7-day consultation periods, determination period, which was, I'll be honest, was very, very difficult to manage, because the requirement was if you didn't consult and determine within those 14 days, the applicant would get the licence as they applied for, which is very onerous on the local authority, and the government in recognition have changed those tight deadlines to 14 days for consultation and determination each. So it becomes a month process as opposed to 2 weeks, which is very helpful. And that's the end of the report. And members, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them for you.
Councillor Van Dolkin first.
Thank you, Chairman. Dan, pavement licences. This, I mean, I remember because I was on the committee at the time. During COVID, in particular, there was a bit of a boom of it, and it's remained that way. And I hope for that it's worked out. And in fact, that is my question. Has there been? Sorry, have the trade and indeed the customers taken to it and not causing too much of a problem?
We're not seeing a significant number of complaints. We do get complaints about pavement licences. We get complaints where a licence holder has encroached further than they should. They have not provided barriers, for instance, or they've reduced the area of the pavement more than they should have done. We've had complaints where the pavement licence holders will before the area, they would put items like A-boards, planters, menu stands, bins outside their premises. But then, when they've added the pavement licence on top, they then put the other stuff outside their area. So we've had those kinds of complaints, but not in significant numbers. And normally it's officers spotting or colleagues from County Highway spotting stuff, not necessarily the public. The good news is we've not had any real or significant number of complaints from users who could be affected by reductions in width of usable pavement, or where there's something new there and they're not expecting it, from the disabled, partially sighted, for example. So we've not been having a huge number of complaints in that area. So generally it's been quite positive.
And behaviour of...
It's a statement, but I'm not aware of one single complaint regarding behaviour of customers. We did add a terminal hour for pavement licences, and the committee will be aware that it was 10 o'clock in the very beginning when we set that up. We haven't changed that, and that will come up again for discussion when we bring the policy to you. You could argue potentially there could be more complaints if we extended that beyond 10 o'clock at night. And the last report I submitted roughly this time last year, I said that I felt that we should keep the terminal hour as it was because we hadn't received those kind of complaints. But I think that we would be mindful on an individual basis if we felt that a pavement licence area was in a particularly built-up area, and we've not had that type of application where a licensable area is in a particularly built-up area that is affecting late at night, for instance, would be the obvious. So yeah, so far so good.
Councillor Pell.
Regarding 3.3 premises licence, all we have here is grant of the application. Can I ask if conditions were added to this from the noise point of view? This is in Grinster Green. Where I live in Halstead, it kept me awake several nights running, as it did people in Earls Cone and Coning-Gain. So it's granted, but I would hope that conditions were put on to control the noise.
Can I just speak on this?
Should I answer one question at a time, or so this is not me defending the actions of the licensing committee, or defending, or more importantly, defending the actions of the applicant. But what I will say is the application was for the sale of alcohol on sales. The application was not for regulated entertainment. Now, you may, and for those members who have been a licence committee member for a significant length of time, will be aware of the government deregulation with respect to live and recorded music in around 2014, which allowed all on-licensed premises to be able to undertake live, regulated entertainment, live and recorded music in particular, between the hours of 8 o'clock in the morning and 11 o'clock at night.
Oh, well, this is past that. This is in the middle of the night.
So the government required that any premises that had an on-licensed premises, on licence for sale of alcohol, could undertake live and recorded music. Now the premises has that licence, and it's for the licence holder to ensure that those requirements are met. The licence, there was consultation with colleagues from Environmental Health and Police, and you know, the licensable area is generally restricted to inside. And I'm not able to comment whether there's been any significant complaints since the initial issues that were experienced by people in Housestead when, you know, you know, a number of months ago. But again, what I will say to members are, and they should be providing guidance to their constituents, if they are suffering noise nuisance as at the hands of a licensed premises, then the review process is there for them to use to call a review of the premises licence. And then should there be issues with live and recorded music during those times, it doesn't mean just because somebody's put a condition, somebody says that you can do something between two sets of times, that you actually can do what you like, you really can't. So you know, if there are problems, conditions can be put on either during those time frames or outside of those time frames.
I have a quick question for you, Dan. On the proactive action, you said we have officers going out to various areas, not just Braintree, but into Chelmsford, Colchester and stuff like that, around the Essex area. We issue a lot of licences to 24/7, and these are for school runs, probably in Buckinghamshire, Bedfordshire, quite a big area. Do our officers go out to those schools and look at the vehicles?
The answer at the moment is not yet. My colleague has been employed to do a lot of his work from April the 1st, and we're doing Essex at the moment, but we're doing all of Essex, and we're going up into Suffolk. So not yet at the moment, but we will be. Yeah, we certainly will be going to. We've got contacts now with Buckinghamshire County Council, for example, and we will be going into those areas. Ask me that question again in 2025.
I will make a note of that. Any other questions? Councillor Ramage.
Dan, you mentioned earlier on about licensing of cabs in the district. Is there a limit to the amount of cabs you can limit within the district itself? Because I thought there was, and and also to something the Chair's brought up regarding the drivers' panel. They're not local drivers, most of them that were on those panels. They were from London, wherever, you know, and we've got this influx of drivers coming from everywhere. And is that an ongoing thing as far as we're concerned? Thank you.
So members will be aware we can limit the number of taxi licences we issue, and we do, and we just increased those by 8 to 92. So we increase the number of taxi licences, the vehicles that we issue, but we can't limit the number of private hire vehicles, and that's where the boom has been in terms of, the significant increase in vehicles. You know, it's gone from about 110 to about 900 private hire vehicles roughly in the last two and a half years, and the majority of those vehicles are engaged in home to school contracts. Now, as long as the companies that are engaging, that are the operators of these companies are based in the district, and the vehicles are licensed by the district, and the drivers are licensed by the district, then that's perfectly acceptable. And what you'll find is these drivers are coming from everywhere to fulfil those contracts, you know, from other parts of the country, because the company is based. Now, if you speak to the company, they'll be pressing for a national solution to this, because, you know, it makes it very difficult for them to bring their drivers to Braintree, that some have never been here before, to get a licence when they'll be going back to where they live to fulfil those contracts. Now, this, you know, these sort of companies will have licences in a number of authorities, but they certainly are choosing Braintree generally for the majority of Essex and some other parts of the country. But what we're not seeing is that, you know, this one company has fulfilled school contracts throughout the whole country, and we are certainly seeing that the licence that we issue will only go to a certain part. I think Buckinghamshire, Berkshire is probably about as far as it goes, Northamptonshire as well. But we're not seeing any applications from Lancashire, Yorkshire, Devon, Cornwall. So there certainly is. You know, the company we're talking about, you know, we've got more than 5,000 vehicles, and we probably license about 800 or 900 of those. So it's just a relatively small proportion. But that's perfectly acceptable. You are seeing those drivers coming in from other parts of the country.
Okay, thank you.
Just to put this in context, there's a local authority in part of the country that has roughly 30,000 drivers, and they're not all from. Well, they're definitely not. Let's just say you'll be seeing their vehicles driving around this district with their plates on, and this authority is a long way away. So it's becoming it's kind of a consequence of legislation that actually, and things are changing. Not we've talked about changes in the taxi trade, but you know, you've got some of these large national companies that are just operating throughout the country. You know, Uber being one as an example. Hope that's helped.
Any more questions? No?
No, the report.
And we just